Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Charlie arrived in Nice with a storm raging inside of him, a storm that had been brewing ever since fragments of the truth about his father Cain's deeds had reached him, and now, face to face with the man who once embodied the very definition of a father figure and protector, he could no longer contain the fury, the grief, and the moral outrage that had taken root in his heart. So in the glistening light of the Riviera, with the Mediterranean breeze sweeping through the balconies of the villa, where Lily had tried to hold her family together, Charlie denounced Cain's crimes in a torrent of words that shattered what little illusion of peace had been holding this fractured clan together, his voice trembling not with weakness but with a conviction sharpened by betrayal, as he accused Cain of not only betraying Lily's trust but of poisoning the very essence of family loyalty with secrets, lies, and sins buried under layers of charm, and every syllable landed like a blow because Lily, who had prayed that perhaps her children could forgive, was now heartbroken in ways she could hardly articulate, watching her son dismantle the fragile structure of their family with truths too powerful to ignore, while Cain stood there, shoulders heavy, eyes dark, struggling between the instinct to defend himself with the usual smooth half-truths and the dawning realization that there was no redemption left in pretense. And so the night stretched longer, heavy with confessions, recriminations, memories of better times, and the haunting awareness that the Ashby family was unraveling strand by strand, perhaps beyond repair, as Charlie recalled every shadow of neglect, every manipulation he had observed, recounting with devastating precision how Cain's machinations in Genoa City had not only endangered lives but destroyed trust, how his greed and desperate desire for power had pulled them into scandals that scarred their reputations, how Lily had borne the brunt of his betrayals yet still fought to forgive, and yet forgiveness seemed like a curse now as Charlie's anger grew sharper, demanding accountability not in whispers but in thunderous declarations, accusing his father of hiding behind excuses, of pretending his crimes were mistakes when in truth they were choices, calculated steps in a dance of ambition that left his family bleeding. And Lily, listening, felt as if her very heart was splitting in two, because the sight of her son standing against his father was both a moment of pride in Charlie's courage and a stab of despair that her children had been forced into this battlefield of loyalty. And every time Cain tried to interject, Charlie cut him down with another truth, another reminder of how deeply he had failed them, bringing up the nights Lily had cried alone, the humiliation of public exposure, the constant weight of having to explain why their father always seemed entangled in danger and deceit, and the villa seemed to echo with ghosts of their past, memories of laughter on family vacations, Christmas mornings filled with joy, moments of unity that now seemed like cruel illusions, because with every word Charlie spoke, those memories soured, tainted by the knowledge that the foundation beneath them had been riddled with rot, and Lily could no longer tell whether she was mourning the family they once were or the realization that perhaps they had never truly been that family at all. Perhaps Cain's crimes had always been quietly corroding the bonds she thought unbreakable, and the heartbreak pressed down on her chest until she could hardly breathe, because she loved Cain once with a devotion that forgave too much, and she loved Charlie with a mother's unyielding pride, and now those loves were colliding in the ugliest way, as her son declared that he could never again see Cain as the father he once revered, never again allow himself to be fooled by the man's smile or reassurances, and Cain, at last, dropped the mask, his voice ragged with desperation, pleading that everything he did was for the family, that the mistakes were born of love and fear of losing them. But Charlie only shook his head, his eyes burning with tears that he refused to let fall, saying that love should not look like manipulation, that fear should not be an excuse for cruelty, and that a true father would have chosen honesty over deceit, even if it meant losing everything. And Lily, unable to stop the tidal wave of truth crashing through her family, whispered broken words, begging them both to stop before they said things that could never be taken back. Yet deep inside she knew the damage had already been done, because in denouncing Cain's crimes Charlie had also severed something invisible yet vital, the tether that once bound child to father with trust and respect. And as silence finally fell over the villa, broken only by the distant crash of waves against the shore, Lily realized that her family had indeed fallen apart, not in one cataclysmic blow but in a series of fractures that had finally splintered into irreparable shards, leaving her clutching at fragments of love that might never fit back together. And the night air felt colder, crueler, as she stood between the wreckage of a marriage she could no longer salvage and the grief of a son who had grown up too fast by facing the truth of his father's sins, and Cain, left hollow by the denunciation, could not meet either of their eyes, for the man who once fought for redemption now seemed swallowed whole by the weight of his crimes, and the villa that was meant to be a place of escape in Nice had become a courtroom, a confessional, and a graveyard for the dreams of the Ashby family. As the lights dimmed and Lily wept in silence, her heart breaking over and over again, knowing that even in the most beautiful city, love could collapse into ruin when trust was gone, and that perhaps this was the true tragedy of Cain's downfall, not just the crimes he committed, but the family he destroyed beyond repair. After the initial storm of accusations, the villa in Nice seemed to sink into a hollow, oppressive silence that pressed on every soul present, as if the walls themselves mourned the collapse of a family that had once been, or had at least seemed to be, whole. Lily could feel her chest tighten with every shallow breath, each inhalation a sharp reminder of the love she had poured into her children and her marriage, only to watch it unravel in front of her eyes. As Cain slumped into a chair, the weight of Charlie's words pressing on him like invisible chains, his face pale and drawn, and yet there was defiance simmering beneath his exhaustion, the kind of stubborn refusal to fully submit that had always defined him, even as he knew that tonight, nothing could save him from the judgment of his own son. Charlie, meanwhile, remained standing, his posture rigid, shoulders squared in a way that exuded both anger and sorrow, because as much as he wanted to dismantle the man before him, there was still a flicker of pain, a shadow of the boy who once adored his father despite knowing the flaws, and that contradiction only made his denunciation sharper, more poignant, and devastatingly effective, cutting through Cain's attempts at mitigation, every excuse met with a precise counter, every justification destroyed by the sheer force of evidence and memory, and Lily's heart ached as she watched the battle between father and son unfold, knowing that whatever love she had tried to nurture between them could no longer bridge the chasm opened by betrayal. The conversation spiraled, at times almost violent in its emotional intensity, as Charlie recounted hidden deals, manipulations, and cover-ups that Cain had orchestrated in Genoa City, revealing not only financial misdeeds and betrayals of business trust but also deeply personal betrayals that struck at the core of their family unit, and Lily could hear the rawness in her son's voice, a mix of righteous indignation and grief, and it became painfully clear that this was not just about punishment. It was about the moral reckoning every child faces when the parent they trusted is exposed as deeply flawed, the betrayal so intimate it hurts more than any external judgment ever could, and she felt herself torn between wanting to intervene, to shield Cain from the full brunt of Charlie's anger, and wanting to allow her son the catharsis he so desperately needed, understanding that denying him this confrontation might be as harmful as Cain's own sins. The evening stretched on as the Mediterranean moonlight filtered through the open windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the room, the shadows mirroring the fractured relationships, the unspoken accusations that hovered in the air, and Lily, in quiet moments between the eruptions of verbal fire, reflected on her own complicity, the times she had overlooked Cain's questionable choices, the moments she had rationalized, excused, or even protected him, and the guilt weighed on her heavily, intertwining with her heartbreak, making it almost impossible to distinguish where anger ended and sorrow began, as though the very essence of family, of love itself, was being stripped bare, examined, and found wanting. Cain, at one point, finally lifted his head, his eyes glassy yet defiant, attempting to articulate a defense, to plead for understanding, to remind Charlie of the good he had done, the love he had once demonstrated, and the intentions that had perhaps been misinterpreted, but the words fell flat, hollow echoes against the relentless tide of facts and memories that Charlie unleashed, and Lily could see the painful truth in Cain's eyes, the recognition that the man he had tried to be, the father he had hoped to embody, had been irrevocably overshadowed by the choices he made, the lies he told, and the secrets he buried, and that realization hit her with such force that tears pricked her own eyes, because it was a grief that encompassed not just the present but the past, the cumulative effect of years spent defending, forgiving, and hoping, now confronted with the stark reality that hope alone could not heal all wounds. As the night deepened, tensions rose further when Charlie confronted Cain with the knowledge of his manipulations in the most intimate spheres of family life, revealing how Cain had subtly influenced Lily's decisions, used charm and persuasion to bend situations to his advantage, and even orchestrated conflicts that left his children questioning their own judgments. And with each revelation, the villa seemed to shrink, the air thick with betrayal, anger, and the unrelenting weight of truth, while Lily's heart seemed to fracture anew with each blow, caught between sorrow for the man she loved and awe at the courage of the son she had raised to demand honesty and integrity. In one particularly harrowing moment, Charlie recounted a conversation he had overheard years ago, a seemingly innocent exchange that, in hindsight, revealed Kane's willingness to manipulate circumstances for personal gain, even when it meant placing the family at risk. And the memory of that moment came flooding back to Lily, the realization of how deeply her children had been exposed to Kane's darker side, how much they had suffered emotionally under the guise of familial protection, and she felt a dizzying mix of guilt and rage, knowing that while Kane had chosen his path, she too had been complicit, had allowed him space to maneuver, had believed in the illusion of redemption too readily. As Charlie's denunciation continued, Kane's defenses became increasingly fragile, his once commanding presence reduced to a man confronting the undeniable truth of his own failings, and for the first time in many years, he felt powerless, stripped of the veneer of control he so carefully maintained, while Lily, standing nearby, felt the bittersweet sting of witnessing justice served, yet mourned the man she once believed could be both flawed and noble, realizing that the love she had held onto was now intertwined with grief so profound it seemed inescapable, as if the very identity of her family had been rewritten in a single night of revelations. The emotional crescendo reached its peak when Charlie, his voice trembling yet unwavering, laid bare the cumulative impact of Kane's choices, painting a vivid picture of a family destabilized, of trust shattered, of childhood innocence compromised, of loyalty tested and found wanting. And Lily could feel the echo of those words deep in her soul, the resonating truth that even in moments of love, actions had consequences that could not be undone, and that the bonds of family, though resilient, were not impervious to the corrosive effects of deceit, manipulation, and betrayal. And that realization, painful as it was, became the defining truth of the night, marking a turning point that would forever alter their relationships, reshape their perceptions, and demand that every member of the family confront the raw, unfiltered reality of their lives, their choices, and their capacity for forgiveness, compassion, and survival. As the hours wore on, the villa became a chamber of confessions, accusations, and mournful introspection, the night air filled with the heavy scent of tension and salt from the nearby sea, and Lily, feeling both physically and emotionally drained, allowed herself to collapse onto a sofa, the weight of heartbreak pressing down with an almost tangible force, while Kane, seated across from her, finally seemed to grasp the depth of the chasm he had created, his eyes reflecting regret, despair, and the haunting knowledge that reconciliation, if even possible, would be painstakingly slow and fraught with reminders of what had been lost. Charlie, having spent the better part of the evening delivering his indictment, finally paused, his chest heaving with the effort of exposing the truth. And for a moment, silence fell, heavy and absolute, punctuated only by the distant crash of waves and the occasional creak of the villa settling. And in that silence, Lily felt the weight of solitude, of a mother witnessing the collapse of the family she had fought so hard to preserve. And yet, paradoxically, she also felt a strange clarity, a sharp understanding of who they were now, stripped of pretense, raw and exposed. And though her heart ached unbearably, she knew that the night's revelations, painful as they were, had illuminated the reality of their lives, forcing each of them to confront the truth without the comforting veil of denial. And that confrontation, though excruciating, was a necessary step toward any hope of healing, however distant or uncertain it might be. And as the moon climbed higher, casting pale silver light across the villa, Kane, Charlie, and Lily sat in an uneasy truce, each grappling with the aftermath of confession, accusation, and heartbreak. And though the night had been long and brutal, it had also stripped away illusions, leaving only the stark, unvarnished truth. A family fractured by crime and deceit, a mother's heart splintered by grief and love, a son emboldened by moral clarity, and a father confronted with the irrevocable consequences of his actions. And in that moment, amidst the pain and the sorrow, the fragile threads of potential reconciliation shimmered faintly in the darkness, like distant stars barely visible against the backdrop of a turbulent sea. And Lily, with tears streaming down her face, whispered a quiet prayer for courage, for understanding, for the strength to face whatever came next, knowing that the road ahead would be long, painful, and uncertain, yet recognizing that this night, this reckoning in Nice, was the turning point that would define the future of the Ashby family forever. As dawn crept slowly over the horizon, spilling pale light across the villa in Nice, the aftershocks of the night's confrontation lingered like a heavy fog, settling in every corner of the rooms where laughter and warmth had once thrived, leaving only echoes of accusation, grief, and betrayal. And Lily sat silently on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, feeling as though the weight of the world had settled squarely on her shoulders, each heartbeat a reminder of the fragility of the family she had fought so hard to nurture, while Kane remained motionless in his chair across from her, head bowed, eyes hollow, a man stripped of the illusions that had once protected him. As Charlie paced the room, his movements tense and deliberate, fueled by a combination of righteous fury and sorrowful disappointment, the kind that only a child who has loved deeply and been profoundly let down can carry, and in every step he took, he seemed to replay the moments that had shaped his perception of his father, from childhood memories of fleeting tenderness overshadowed by manipulations, to teenage years of navigating moral ambiguities that should never have been his burden, and now, as an adult, he stood as a judge over the man who had once symbolized safety, guidance, and paternal care, yet had instead left him with a legacy of mistrust, pain, and disillusionment. And Lily could see in Charlie's eyes that this confrontation was not simply about punishment, but about establishing a boundary, an uncompromising declaration that Kane's actions would no longer be tolerated, that love without accountability was meaningless, and that the family's survival depended on facing uncomfortable truths no matter how devastating. And yet, even as Charlie's words reverberated in the room, Lily could not help but mourn the man Kane had been in her memories, the father and husband who had, at times, shown flashes of genuine kindness and devotion, flashes that now seemed painfully ironic, because the more she reflected on them, the more she realized that they had been exceptions rather than the rule, delicate moments of beauty surrounded by a sea of deception, and that realization struck her with a grief so profound that tears began to spill freely down her cheeks, unchecked, as if the years of denial and hope were being purged all at once, leaving her raw, exposed, and painfully aware of the chasm that now yawned between her and the man she had once loved. Kane, sensing the depth of her anguish, attempted to speak, his voice hoarse, laced with regret, begging for understanding, for a chance to explain, to show that not everything he had done was malicious, that some actions had been misguided attempts to protect, to provide, to maintain control in a world that often seemed cruel and unyielding. Yet Charlie's presence, unwavering and unflinching, made it impossible for Kane's words to land with any grace, as the younger man's piercing gaze, sharp with moral clarity, cut through the excuses, the justifications, and the fleeting defenses, and Lily realized with a sinking heart that the veneer of family cohesion that had once masked Kane's transgressions was gone forever, leaving them all bare to the harsh light of truth. As the hours passed, tensions remained taut, electric with unspoken threats, simmering resentment, and the lingering ache of lost trust, and Lily, in moments of quiet reflection, replayed every interaction, every decision, every choice that had led them here, from Kane's subtle manipulations in business dealings to his often hidden personal schemes, all of which had chipped away at the foundation of their family, unnoticed or rationalized until now, and the magnitude of it all pressed down on her with a relentless force, making it almost impossible to imagine a future where the Ashby family could recover, could rebuild, or could even exist in the same form, because the innocence of faith, the unspoken contract of familial loyalty, had been violated too thoroughly, too publicly, too painfully, and the awareness of that truth carved a wound in her heart that would not easily heal. And yet, even amidst the devastation, Lily felt a flicker of recognition, a strange, bittersweet understanding that this confrontation, this brutal exposure of sins, while agonizing, was necessary, a brutal purification that might, in time, allow them to rebuild on foundations of honesty and integrity, foundations that had long been absent, undermined by Kane's charm, cunning, and self-interest, and in that flicker, she glimpsed a fragile hope that one day, with accountability and remorse, perhaps some semblance of connection could be restored, even if it would never be the same. The tension escalated further when Charlie, his voice still taut with anger, began recounting specific incidents of Kane's interference in Lily's personal life, in ways subtle yet destructive, highlighting moments where Kane's decisions had forced Lily into impossible positions, where her integrity had been tested, and where her relationships with her children had been strained by circumstances orchestrated or exacerbated by Kane's hidden agendas. And each revelation, carefully detailed, felt like another hammer striking the fragile structure of their family, and Lily could barely breathe, as if each accusation was not merely an intellectual recounting of events but a physical blow to her heart, the weight of years of deception compressed into a night of reckoning that refused to let them escape. Kane's defenses, once confident and polished, began to crumble under the relentless onslaught of truth, his voice growing quieter, his posture slumping, his hands fidgeting as if the very act of holding on to control was slipping from him, and Lily felt a complicated mixture of emotions, pity for the man who had brought this upon himself, sorrow for the fractured family around her, and grief for the shattered illusions that had kept them all tethered to hope, illusions that had now been burned away by Charlie's moral clarity, leaving only scorched remnants of what might have been. As the confrontation stretched into the morning, the villa became a stage for the rawest forms of emotional expression, with Charlie delivering his moral verdict, Kane oscillating between pleading and silence, and Lily caught between her role as mother and her identity as a wife, unable to reconcile the man she had loved with the man before her, and yet unwilling to abandon the possibility, however slim, of redemption, of repair, of finding a path through the rubble that could allow them to exist as a family in some form. Though the contours of that possibility remained painfully vague and uncertain. At one point, in a rare moment of vulnerability, Kane confessed that his actions had been driven by fear, by an obsessive need to control outcomes, by a desire to protect the family in ways that had been misguided, harmful, and destructive. And in that confession, Lily glimpsed the remnants of the man she had loved, the father and husband who had tried, in his flawed way, to shield them from harm. And yet, the acknowledgement came too late to undo the damage, too late to erase the years of manipulation, the betrayals, the lies, the erosion of trust, and Lily could feel her heart fracturing further, torn between compassion and the acute pain of disappointment. Charlie, unwilling to accept excuses, pressed forward, demanding accountability, demanding that Kane recognize the full impact of his choices, the ripple effects on everyone around him, from business associates to friends, but most devastatingly, on the family he had sworn to protect. And as each accusation landed,